Would be arguably the first, if the Republicans don't nominate a woman, the first female candidate representing a major party in our nation's history. That will be new, that will be fresh, that will be empowering for so many people who will say, this is fundamentally different.
Let's begin the first half of this Friday Arena. First up, she's spokesperson for the Tea Party Leadership Fund Political Action Committee and a former Republican congressional candidate for the 32nd District in Texas, Katrina Pierson. Next, he is managing partner of the law firm DCBA Law and Policy, former confidential counsel in the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, Michael Barnes. I thank you both for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, Katrina, as always, ladies first, and here you go. Hillary Clinton is going to announce on Sunday that she wants to become president of the United States. There are some people who say she is completely unbeatable, and there is no one on the Republican side who could touch her. What do you think?
Well, I think if this were happening 3-4 years ago when we had this discussion, they might be right. But so much has happened since then. You even hear Democrats in her own party saying things that they're not really confident in her. They're not quite sure she can get out of all these scandals. But for the most part, when we look at the electorate, people are looking for something new. They want fresh. They want new ideas. They want vision. They are tired of the dynasties. Nobody wants to see another Bush-Clinton matchup. And I mean, she's got to get out from under all of these scandals she's in right now. So launching a presidential campaign in light of all these discussions, she's going to be spending most of her time trying to convince people that she had nothing to do with the scandals, and she's going to have a very hard time doing that.
Michael, are all those scandals going to mean anything at all when you look at the fact that the Clinton machine can put together millions of dollars and she is so far ahead of everybody fundraising, and people seem to forget that sometimes that's the key to becoming president?
I do think that scandals have created a situation now in which the voters are less and less willing to trust Hillary Clinton. She has to build back her reputation of being someone who not only can govern well, which is established, but is also trustworthy and doing more than pursuing her own professional.
Well, wait a minute a sec. Hang on, Mike, I'm going to stop you for a sec. When you say get that reputation back, there are those people who say she never had that reputation of trustworthiness in the first place.
Well, it certainly has fallen recently, so it was higher in the past. But while she was in the State Department, I do think that she had a reputation as someone who was hardworking and willing. She showed she was willing to put her ego aside and take direction from a boss and President Obama. And she really worked very hard and demonstrated that she could be farther outside the spotlight. So generally, I think she was in a better position then than she is now.
Katrina, what do you think about those people? And again, Michael says what a lot of people say. They say that she was a very hardworking Secretary of State. Some people say that she was very hardworking at getting frequent flyer miles.
She was very hardworking at operating private emails on servers during that time as well. And I think it's her State Department experience which is really going to cause her a lot of trouble, considering we had everything that happened in Benghazi. And we now know that she was talking with staffers on their private emails during this time too. A lot of things fell apart as Hillary Clinton was in office, and I don't think that's going to be a benefit to her.
All right, Mike, 90 seconds.
Well, the opportunity to deal with Benghazi occurred during the prior presidential election, and that was a lost opportunity. So since then, I think the currency of that particular issue is no longer relevant. But she didn't read the cables, though, when they were asking for help. Our ambassador died on her watch. She's accountable for this. Of course. By the time this all comes up to election, it'll be a 4-year-old issue that we unfortunately will have moved on for without adequate means of addressing the situation. But the opportunity to do that was during the prior presidential election. Going back to the original question, though, I do think that Hillary Clinton at this point is in a solid position to win if she reaches the general election. I think the greatest threat that she has is in the primary, given that the competitors on the Republican side at this point, none of them, I think, is going to be electable in a general election in light of their extreme and religionist social views.
So you don't see anybody, Michael, on the Republican side right now, in your opinion, who could pose any kind of a real threat to Mrs. Clinton?
I do not, because they are so far out of the mainstream on social views that it's going to be impossible for them to convince people to vote for the types of things that they're advancing now during the primaries, absolute out-of-the-norm positions.
Katrina, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to respond to that, because I'll bet you do have a response.
I do have a response for that, because since this administration, including Clinton, you have seen, even in blue states where Republicans who are socially conservative get elected time and time again. It happened this last midterm election when the so-called extreme views of Republicans shut down the government, and they still won.
That's in gerrymandered districts. We don't have a gerrymandered national electorate.
We do not, but people are still concerned about their safety. We have ISIS out of control. Obama's removing restrictions from Iran and in the embargo in Cuba. So we have an opportunity to go to the public today and say, this is our policy, this is what we stand for.
Katrina, hang on just a sec. Michael, I'm going to have to stop you there because we're right up against the clock. We're going to come back, do more when this edition of The Arena continues. Spirited Arena, let's get back to it. Spokesperson for the Tea Party Leadership Fund PAC, former Republican congressional candidate in Texas, Katrina Pierson, and managing partner of the law firm DCBA Law and Policy, Michael Barnes. Michael, I'm going to start with you this time. We are now seeing the first half of what happened in South Carolina now. The video showing us a basic traffic stop, if you will, that then went entirely wrong. Does what you saw in this shooting, in this very first part of the video and the very first part of the incident, change your mind at all about what happened?
No, the video that's recently come out with the first part of the stop of the individual who was killed actually makes it even worse because it shows that the man was not a threat to the police officer. In fact, he was running away. So ultimately,
well, but we're talking about the first video. Hold on one sec, Mike. We're talking about the first video here, and in the first one, he is stopped in the traffic stop as we watch, and then he is told to stay in his vehicle. He then gets out and runs. So just in this one first half of the video, does this change any of your opinions?
Absolutely not. Again, it shows that he was trying to run away. He was not a threat to the police officer. He was pulled over for something that might have been as simple as a license plate issue, or something quite simple that it showed that he came out with his hands empty. He didn't have any reason to pose any sort of threat to the police officer.
Well, let's all be fairness here, Michael, because it's the way I do things. We don't know, and we can say, and we don't want to, in any sense, we're not condoning what happened. He shot an unarmed man in the back, but we can't say, for instance, that the officer knew that when he got out of the car that he didn't have anything in his hands and he wasn't carrying a weapon. You'd agree with that?
That he wasn't carrying any, yes, but at the time he was trying to run away, right? So he was not an aggressor in any sort of scenario that would cause an officer to feel like he needed to be defensive.
Absolutely. All right, Katrina, does this change anything the way you saw this? Is there anything else that you take away from this or add to your opinion?
Well, I think it's unfortunate because the officer gave an account. And I think that's why this first video actually does make it worse. Because when the man got out of the car and took off running, he yelled, "Taser, taser," but at that time we know he didn't really have anything because in the officer's statement he said he had my taser, and so how could that have happened if he took off running? So I think that's why this video is more condemning than anything else. But at the end of the day, the guy took off running because he probably knew he had a warrant, and the system is probably going to show the officer was in the wrong.
Well, he did have a warrant that has already been talked about in the reports, indeed, so he was afraid of going back to jail. We do know that. Now, let me throw the real controversial side of this, because here's the thing that will always get people talking. Katrina, I'll come to you first on this one. There have already been a number of articles, in this case and in others, where there have been police officers who have written and law enforcement who have said, if you followed the police officer's instructions and if you would have stayed in the car, you would still be alive today. That's what the cops are saying. That's what the law enforcement people are saying. How do you react when you hear that?
Well, I mean, there's a truth to that. If you follow what the officers say, then chances are you would be alive. But unfortunately, the officers also have protocol when it comes to a fleeing suspect or someone they think might have a weapon on them. And when the guy is running away, you don't shoot 8 times, killing that person. I mean, that's just common sense. So the officers do have an accountability in that side. But at the end of the day, look, he gave he told the officer, he's going to sit in his car. He got out, got back in. Then he took off running. At that point, the officer should have been going by his own protocol, not by what the citizen should be doing in the case.
Michael, what most about this distresses you?
Well, if you look at what's going on politically, I do think there is this knee-jerk reaction to say, well, if the decedent had followed the rules of the protocol and stayed in, then he wouldn't be dead. But that goes to also the same question, well, if he had paid his child support, he wouldn't be dead. And that's not a crime that's punishable by death, right? So let's get away from those arguments. And what is also interesting politically is that conservatives, small government conservatives, are not latching onto this as what is the worst result that government can do to an individual, is that you can take the life of a person without having given due process of law. And so where's the outrage on the right with respect to government operating at its very worst in how it can engage with an individual citizen who has individual liberties?
So, Katrina, where then, in your opinion, is that? Where is that outrage on the right? Where do you think that should be?
Well, I think we have seen some of the outrage considering body cams. I mean, that was the first thing that was discussed when this incident occurred, and South Carolina's already ordered them. We all know that there are bad apples in police departments. No one is pretending that that doesn't happen. But the way you resolve that issue isn't to, take away some of the authority the police officers have if they're not already following their protocol. It's to put body cams on them just to make sure that we know and everybody knows what's happening at the time. Luckily, there was somebody else on the scene that got everything on video, and this was an open and shut case so far. If something new comes up, we'll hear about it.
Open and shut case.
Thank goodness, yes, for the citizen.
No, I was going to say, please, Mike, go ahead.
Thank goodness for the citizen who took the video. Yeah, so thank goodness for the citizen who took the video, but it's more than just putting body cams or making, a case, an example out of the bad actors. You also have to look at the systemic issues. So does it make sense for prosecutors who typically work with law enforcement to be the ones who would ultimately prosecute law enforcement abuses? You need to have a system that provides for special prosecutors in situations such as these, for example, where the officer has been accused of some wrongdoing.
Which we have talked about many times here with regard to those special prosecutors. Up against the clock. Hold on. We're coming right back with Katrina Pierson and Michael Barnes in the arena. The arena continues. Spokesperson for the Tea Party Leadership Fund, PAC, and a former Republican congressional candidate in Texas, Katrina Pierson. He is managing partner of the law firm DCBA Law and Policy. Joins us from Washington, D.C., Michael Barnes. All right, we got a few other things to take care of here. All right, Katrina, I tell you what, I'm going to come with you on this one first because we have talked a lot about national security and people are always talking about personal security. Here we have in northern India, they are now using drones that fire pepper spray to control the protesters there. They've got 5 drones with cameras, 2 kilos of pepper spray. They say the results were brilliant. I don't know about you, but this sounds like something that maybe we should look at here in America. What do you think?
Probably not. It's interesting, though, because this company in Africa that's making these devices, they say it's for riot control. But when you have a country like the United States where you have the right to assemble, you wonder if these might get used when they shouldn't be used, and then what happens? There's no recourse for that matter.
Well, you have right to assemble, but you also don't have right to riot, and let's be honest, if you look at different places where there are riots, you have to take control, and then we're always looking at some sort of physical confrontation then between police and citizens, or just citizens and citizens. Wouldn't this help tamp this down a little bit and not have to worry about people walking in with tasers and billy clubs?
Well, it absolutely would, but it would also intimidate those from freely assembling to begin with, because there are bad actors that go and try to cause trouble that may not be from the protesters. If we look at Ferguson, where you had the state that was actually there and organized to manage the riots, they stood back and allowed all that to happen. So who's to say when that's going to happen and when it isn't going to happen? I think this is really a little bit overboard. Now they're talking about using it for war, replacing soldiers with some of these drones, and I think it's a discussion that has to be had because we are moving into the future, more into the digital age with technology, and this is an effective weapon. The question is when and where should it be used? All
right, now we'll talk about those robots here in just a moment. But Michael, what about it? There are those, I think she brings up a very good point, does Katrina, here, where it intimidates people, but don't you want to intimidate the bad guys and the bad gals from not showing up and doing something stupid in the first place?
Well, from not showing up, not necessarily as long as they don't do something bad, right? But to the extent that we're not using lethal force in these instances, great. That's progress over places like Ferguson and Charleston, I suppose. But having these options available so that you can protect life on both sides of whatever conflict, great. But to the extent that there are bad actors who might use them in the wrong way, that's not a reason not to use these sorts of devices like the drones for pepper spray. You want to weed out those bad actors for government. So concern that government is bad exists no matter what you're talking about, drones or otherwise. Deal with bad government, and these sorts of devices could be used to protect human life on both sides of an undertaking or an occurrence that shouldn't be happening.
What about sending robots in? Because now we've got a report by Human Rights Watch and the Harvard Law School says fully autonomous weapons should be banned by international treaty. Hey, guess what? The Terminator may not be that far away, Mike, because we're looking at a time right now when they are talking about artificial intelligence and sending robots in instead of human beings. Now, for those who don't want to get people killed, that might not be a bad idea.
Right. That study, I do think, is one-sided. It discusses legal arguments, I think, from one particular point of view. But as you know, with our adversarial legal system, there's always an argument on the other side. So the legal arguments need to be discussed about this. But to the extent that we can protect human life in scenarios of war, that's outstanding. But there is, again, the concern that you're more willing to go into war more readily if you don't have the human casualty. So we do need to have a discussion as to where all of this is going, but we have to make sure that that discussion includes recognition that there are many actors across the world who are not going to adhere to international law, and we're seeing that with Iran, for example. So even if we decide that we're going to adhere to what is a high standard for the United States, we have to recognize that we need to have as best weapons available as possible in light of the fact that there are others still who are not willing to adhere to those laws.
Katrina, do you think it would make us want to go to war more often if we didn't have to worry about the human toll?
Absolutely. If we look at, the opportunity in Syria, where we had a lot of people standing up saying, no, we do not want to send our men and women to Syria. If we would have had these robots, would we have gone to war with Syria? That's the question. So, he's right. I mean, when you save lives because of this digital element, you're also removing the humanitarian side of it, which causes other problems. So again, moving into this digital age of technology and robotics, we must sit down and have these discussions and recourse, because right now all of these systems are coming in and wanting to be implemented without recourse, and that's what we have to discuss.
As long as they build them like Arnold Schwarzenegger, then I think we're all set. Here comes the next. This is interesting now. The House and Senate committees in Tennessee have overwhelmingly approved measures that would designate the Bible as the official book of Tennessee. Even religious leaders are upset about this. Katrina, don't I recall something about a separation between church and state?
Well, absolutely, and that was actually designed to keep government out of religion, not vice versa. They are sovereign states, and if the legislatures vote to make that book a state book, I think they should have every right to do that.
But it's the legislature, though. What about the people in the community? What about, because aren't they supposed to represent all the people?
Legislature. Absolutely, the people elect the legislature.
People get what they deserve in this case.
That's why it's so important. That's why it's important to be involved at the local level. I mean, your states are the only recourse against the federal government, and the people in the states are the only recourse against the state government.
Do you think it's a good idea, though, Katrina? Katrina, do you think it's a good idea?
I think if the state legislature, and I think it was overwhelmingly supported this to happen. So, yes, why not?
All right. Now, Michael, you brought up something on the other side where you said people get what they deserve.
Yes, they elected this legislature. This legislature is acting absurdly. I think they're trying to think that they can somehow advance or protect their religion by making the Bible the official book of the state. I mean, it has no effect. So if they want to do it, let them do it. But it just shows how absurd they are in trying to advance their religious views through the heavy hand of government. And that is exactly, frankly, what the voters deserve for putting them into the office.
Then in your opinion, what we're talking about here is, what we're talking about then is the push of people to push their religion on other people. Correct, Mike?
Yes, that's exactly what is the concern in states like Tennessee, and then we've also got Indiana and Arkansas. I was here with you last week discussing the efforts of legislatures to try to push their religious views through the heavy hand of government on people who don't share them, and that's certainly a direction that we should not be heading. Absolutely, the separation of church and state doesn't mean that you have to have an absolute division. You can allow people who have faiths to be active in government, but don't use the government to advance those faiths.
Katrina, 20
seconds,
you get the last word. Which is exactly what
the Muslim community is doing. The Muslim community is doing the exact same thing. We are seeing the Sharia law bills going into the Texas legislature as well.
And we oppose Sharia law, of course, as well. So you allow it for one, you're going to have to allow it for the other.
But the point is, you have communities at the local level who are adopting these kinds of things.
We're not allowing the application of Sharia law, thank goodness.
Okay, we're going to have to stop it there. I'll tell you what, we're going to bring the both of you back because you just opened up again. At the last second, we always get that big Pandora's box that opens up, and this time it was Sharia law. We're going to have to do this again. Katrina Pierson, Michael Barnes, thank you so much for joining us. You both have a great weekend.
Thank you both.
Great to be with you.
Take care. A tornado decimates a town in northern Illinois, leaving 1 dead and 7 injured. Thankfully, a bit of relief this weekend for the Midwest. For what to expect in your area around the country, here's Jessica Reyes with your Newsmax weather update.
Hey, what's going on? I'm Jessica Reyes with your weather from coast to coast. We'll start off with the good news. Seasonably warm across the southwestern portion of the country. Not so much for our friends by the Great Lakes who dealt with lots of tornadic activity yesterday. For today, not so bad. Chilly with mainly sunny skies. But a lot of that tornadic activity, all that bad weather is moving southward and even into the northeast. We'll get to that in just a second. So all of it will extend from parts of Texas into parts of the southeast, especially by the Atlantic coastline, eventually making its way into parts of Atlanta and to Charlotte throughout the afternoon. And then rain and more strong showers and thunderstorms across the northeastern portion of the country. It will extend into parts of the Ohio Valley, into Pennsylvania, into New York, and again, as I mentioned, into parts of New England. Here are some of your daytime highs for your Friday.